Hey there. So we're here to talk a little bit about working on game design versus narrative. And let's get started. So first of all, a little bit about who we are here on the stage. So first of all, I'm Jukka, the CEO and co-founder of Rival, and I've been in the business about 6 years, made my mistakes, learned from them, and made some new mistakes, and hopefully I'll learn from them as well. And I do a lot of business, recruiting, all that like boring stuff, but I was also part of the design team for the game that we're talking here about.
Right, and I'm Jano Sonkonen, and I'm one of the lead writers in Rival Games. And before, my background is in journalism and media. I have been working in games industry in PR for some years, and as a games journalist even longer. And I also write stuff to Dead Trees, so novels and short stories, and some award-winning interactive fiction, which you may know as text adventures.
And Rival Games itself, we've been around since 2013. We employ about 20 people, 17 at the moment. And we focus on narrative, especially the interactive branching narrative, but we don't want to be just another telltale copycat, so we also do like to invent some innovative gameplay. And especially nowadays, we focus on third-party IPs, which means kind of partnership or licensing deals with known franchises. And we work on PC, Xbox, iOS, Android, PlayStation, Switch, and so on. But without further ado, here's the video of the game that we're here to talk about.
Ah, there she is. Good luck on your trip. And don't make me disown you.
Gee, thanks. But I don't need luck.
Plan, prepare, fact, foresight, choices, triggers, the who, the why, observe, control, finesse, anticipate, plan, prepare, fact, foresight, choices, triggers, the who, the why, observe, control, finesse, anticipate, plan, prepare, fact, foresight, choices, triggers, the who, the why, observe, control, finesse, anticipate.
So the game is called Thief Thieves, and it's based on Robert Kirkman IP. And Robert Kirkman is the guy who created the Walking Dead franchise. So he's got a long background in comics. And I think we started doing kind of a smaller scale game in the beginning 2.5 years ago, but we ended up with a multi-million-dollar franchise. And we had like voice actors from Hollywood. Actually, the lead character just recently played the female lead on the new Mass Effect, so big names. And the game features a lot of 3D gameplay, as you saw in the trailer, but it also features frames, comic frames that we do use a lot to tell the story. But in this talk, we're going to focus on the 3D gameplay elements. But this is actually an early concept of a comic frame, and here's how they ended up. So there was a lot of, especially visual iterations. And since it's a comic IP, of course, we had to nail it right.
And narratively, frames are actually a really great tool because you get so much more detail and nuance and details like that on the characters and the surroundings. And these frames, actually these starting frames, didn't change narratively much from these initial versions. There was one gaping plot hole which we had to take out. It basically required just removing one conversation branch, but it was nice that we noticed it.
Cool. And so we're going to do a small case study on the first heist of the game. And it kind of shows you a glimpse on how we work from the narrative versus design perspective throughout the whole development cycle.
Yeah, the first mission is that Celia, who is our main character, has to steal a collector motorcycle from a mobster. And this is a self-contained one-off mission, which had many functions narratively. It's basically tutorial, and it fleshes out both the story and the characters and lays groundwork for what the rest of the game is actually about, which is quite different from this LA milieu.
So first of all, we choose LA as the first level because that's something that people usually know, at least from the movies. And it was kind of easy from the design perspective just to have something that's based on the Hollywood Hills, a huge mansion. So that meant that we can have actually outdoors, indoors, VIP areas, garage, all that stuff that is kind of different aesthetics within the same level.
Yeah, and it's really nice that we could give something familiar, like everybody knows LA from TV and movies, how it looks, and we kind of wanted to bring this sort of sleazy 80s vibe there also. And so there's a villa and a pool and the stilt houses. Those were the concept pictures we from the narrative team searched to base this first level on.
And there's always a text on the top left corner that from which production stage this is. I accidentally forgot to install the font, so hence it's a little bit small at the moment. And of course, since we're in LA, you've got to have a pool party. So that was the basis when we started off, that let's have this huge party and have the player infiltrate it using stealth and social engineering.
And party also is something that offers a lot of different ways to interact with the world. You have the milieu, you have the house, you have the components of the house, people. It's much more interesting than to have sort of one-off night raid where you just sneak in.
From the design perspective, we actually started, I think like our main inspiration was Clay Entertainment's great Mark of the Ninja, which is kind of a 2D stealth game. So we started from that, and we had actually kind of a 2D movement in a 3D world. So we used lanes to move, the red lines you can see in the design docs.
And from the perspective of the story, the most important thing in this first casing mission was to hear the mobster speak on the phone and eavesdrop him, so you could find more details about the alarms and where the bike is actually held during the party.
But we pretty soon realized that just moving 2D in a 3D world doesn't work. It felt that the player couldn't explore anything and everything was way too limited.
And the dialogue here is first draft or placeholders. Not much actually from here made it to the finished game intact. It was the ones that remained are heavily edited.
And yeah, once again, from the design perspective, just having any dialogue within the game from the beginning was crucial because that allowed us to pace the level much better and see what works on the how it works on the screen and how much actually you can have dialogue on the screen.
Yes.
So next, we actually ditched the lane movement. We went fully 3D and actually rebuilt the whole level. So we kind of had that three-story 3D building that the player can actually go and explore fully.
And in the dialogue side, here we introduced much more social engineering. So Celia had many ways to sneak in by just talking and paying attention to her surroundings and finding ways to distract guards and do such things to get into the house.
So essentially, if anyone didn't get it from the trailer, the game is kind of let's take Telltale and mix that with Hitman and do a light version of both, more or less. But no killing. The game's actually almost non-violent. Is we felt that we've seen a lot of different heist games, but none have actually done it in a way that, for example, Ocean's 11 does it in the movies. So we decided that the non-violent was the right way to go. And as the game evolved, actually, this is from the final version, and you can still see it's actually the same building. It's just a lot more people and the visuals upgraded, but still it remained the same for the past 18 months or so. And since then, we actually just added more people, made the party feel like a party, because that was actually supposed to be the level itself. And that also meant different things for the writing.
There was much more opportunities to add fun of fluff there, and people talking amongst themselves and background conversations you could overhear. And I think we had over 100 throwaway lines which you just could hear in the background.
Yeah, and of course at this point hearing means that they're actually dialogue on screen.
Yeah, just
you don't do voiceovers before.
The kind of bubbles you have in comics that don't have the tail, so they just float there. And that led into the problem that we had speech bubbles everywhere. In the end, it's not a really big level, and if you have people talking in the pool and, you know, arguing with themselves and so on, it really distracted the player from the actually important dialogue, and sometimes actually occluded it, so you couldn't even see it.
Yeah. So from the design perspective, we noticed that the player had clear goals on the level: just get in, steal a bike, get out. But with all the fluff text, there was way too much dialogue, just disorienting the player. So we ended up cutting almost all of it out and just focused on the important dialogue.
And here the design added additional obstacle, which was the mobster's bodyguard. And that actually required writing, so it's mostly social engineering. So there are no takedowns or stuff like that in this game.
Yeah, so basically, we designers introduced a character about like 3 months before shipping that almost completely changed half of the level, and the writers were pretty thrilled about that. No, go for it.
You start, actually.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so in the end, some stuff remained same in the game, some writing remained the same, the layouts, and even mostly the amount of guards remained there from like the early prototypes. But at the same time, I think we tested like a dozen different approaches from the design perspective, how to solve the level, and we actually ended up including about 4 or 5 of them, so there's multiple ways to finish the level.
Okay, here the writers, of course, had to write a lot of stuff that never made it anywhere, so it was just functional, helping to pace the level and give the designers an idea, you know, what happens when. The level designers some ideas that, you know, things can't happen too close to each other, or the bubbles will occlude each other and so on. So this was basically, the text was just chaff or hay or something like that, which you had to have there for design purposes.
Yeah, so basically there's a lot of stuff, but some remain same, as actually the speech bubble here is exactly the same one from the previous slide, but there's like 18 months of development between.
And in games like this, narrative directs design, but it doesn't override it. And you can have a really awesome story, but if it can't be turned into a game that's actually fun, you know, then the story is out. The story loses in that, and it's very good. And of course, when you make a branching game, you at first have this verdant, large, beautiful story tree, story, and then somebody comes with a budget and, you know, cuts something off, and then the timetable cuts off the top, and you kind of have a nice little twig there, which basically means that you can't have new locations, and sort of all the branches that required new assets had to be cut out, most of them, not all. So it was up to the writers to figure out how to make the branching still meaningful. And this could be done in a character and dialogue level. There's, for example, an important part of this game is an interview or interrogation. That's basically the framing story, and the way you talk there, what you say, how you say it, has an incredible amount of meaning to how the game actually ends or what happens in the last couple of levels. So that was a cheap way to make some branching and meaningful choices.
Yeah, and as a last good example, the writers wanted in the beginning of the level that the player would actually do a slow drive-by with the car and just taking pictures, as they usually do in the heist films. And we thought about that from the design perspective, and the only thing we could come up was pretty much a hidden object game, mini-game for that, and that made no sense at all. So we ended up cutting that and just have the player infiltrate the mansion during daytime to scout it out, and then return in the evening for the party.
And there was also this sequence right in the start where the player could go and find some background information that would help with the job, and she could go and meet her biker buddies and ask about these motorcycles, like how can you open, how can you steal them, and find out that bikes from that era could be started with a nail file. So basically the key was kind of symbolic, so that would have made that easier. Or she could have gone to visit Conrad's team's electronic security expert and find out something about the alarm systems and those, which would again make it easier to go around them. But that was cut because of pacing and again assets, and it just didn't make it a fun game. So off it went. I like those, but...
So as summary, basically, writers write, I would say, like 5 pages, and only one of them make to the game, pretty much. But still, those 4 wasted pages are extremely important for the designers, because we actually see a lot that doesn't work, and we can actually test it out in a real environment where there actually each dialogue and the narrative is functioning.
And this goes also for art design. If you have fully fledged character who has a background, you can get ideas about their appearance and how they act and move and all that. And of course it kind of can give ideas that you wouldn't have thought otherwise when you read that long background of the characters.
So that's it. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. Do you guys want to ask anything?
There's a few.
Oh, sorry. It's like, Jukka, if you weren't here, I would be blind and not be able to do anything. Can you hold your hand up again? Yes. Thank you.
Hi, it was a really interesting talk. Thank you. When you guys when you were starting out with the game, did you begin by laying out some of the narrative beats and then kind of building the missions around that, or did you start with like prototyping the missions and then work out from there? Like, how did the relationship between where the narrative started and where the game started, how did that work?
I think we actually started with a script first. Basically, it was a script that we delivered to our partners to basically prove that we can do that. And of course, the story that was in the first mission, it basically directed where the design was going. It made the setting, it introduced the people and what you actually have to do there. And not much is left from that, apart from the milieu and the basic idea. But it actually began with text.
So basically, we did a script. The writers even wrote the levels out, and then designers came in and soon realized that, yeah, this shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
Let's toss it out. So we ended up just doing that. The writers tell us that what is the inputs and outputs of a level, and then the designers do what they do, and they tell the writers that this and this needs to be written. Thanks, deliver.
There was another one this side. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It was very interesting. I'm even more interested because I'm designing a game that has similarities, and I will have a question about the. You mentioned getting rid of all the speech bubbles in the environment, and you mentioned occlusion. They got occluded, so it was cluttered. At that moment, didn't you feel like you were also getting rid of some of your gameplay, because you mentioned social engineering, and so how did that visual design, user experience decision impacted your gameplay?
Those were actually pure fluff, so nothing was lost apart from maybe a little bit of atmosphere. So it was like, imagine this room and people are whispering there, so you have these speech bubbles just appearing. But those were also really distracting. Like, if you have a bubble that has something, the player wants to read it, is this important? So that just didn't work, unfortunately.
So basically, we got rid of all the fun jokes that we all were fun.